Good morning, everybody. So who do we thank for rock and roll? Well, there were many contributors, and one of the early ones was Elvis Presley, and it was on this date, July 5 in 1954, that Elvis made his first successful record, which was a copy of a blues standard, and that record was That's All Right. Elvis Presley was born here in Tupelo, Mississippi, January 8, 1935. So when our story begins, he's around 20 or so. So as a young boy, Elvis didn't really stand out when it came to music. He could never really read music, by the way. He had a good ear for it. But over time, things will change, and he is associated with what was called hillbilly music, which was a combination of country, western, bluegrass, gospel. And part of the fascination of Elvis is how he combined many musical traditions as he developed his talent. Now, Mississippi Slim was a fellow in Tupelo where Elvis was living that had a radio station. He showed Elvis a little bit about how to play guitar, and he actually let Elvis perform on the radio when he was 12. A few years later, the family moved to Memphis. They lived in the projects. Here's a picture of the Lauderdale courts. Elvis had some friends here, and one of his friends was Lee Denson, who showed Elvis a little bit more about how to play the guitar. They actually had a little group, and they would play songs for people living in the project. If you look at this cover, you see various people that you might recognize from the 50s, but rockabilly combines rock and roll and hillbilly. Elvis was associated with that. And as a teenager, older teen in Memphis, he loved to shop at Lansky Brothers. He loved to dress for success, so to speak. And if you went to Elvis's high school and you asked about, well, which guy's Elvis? People would have said, oh, he's the cool dresser. Now, he did bring his guitar to school and he would play, but he stood out more for his fashion sense, I think, than his singing, but that'll change, of course. Now, one of the influences of Elvis was gospel music, and he particularly loved Jake Hess and the Imperials. Elvis went to church as a kid, so he knew that sort of strain of music. He also loved hanging around the blues joints in Memphis, and he got to know Sister Rosetta Sharp's music pretty well, and that influenced him. And the blues great B.B. King remembers Elvis during those years as somebody really interested in the blues. So that's going to be part of his background. So Sam Phillips, pictured here, had a recording studio in Memphis, and he was always willing to try out new acts. And I think it's important to remember how AM radio was really important back then, and people were listening to radio stations that really were physically quite far away, but they had these really strong signals, and that's one way music spread. Sam Phillips on the right, Elvis on the left, with a couple other guys, and it was on this date on July 5. At the end of a recording session, they broke out with That's All Right, and Sam Phillips said, whoa, we got to tape that. That sounds pretty good. So That's All Right was first written and recorded by Arthur Crudup, who was a blues singer. And Elvis covered that, as did many people. And it was this song that gave Elvis his first contract. He started appearing publicly with all the energy and bluesiness that we associate with Elvis. You notice that string bass in the back. That's the real blues thing. But eventually Sam Phillips sold his contract to RCA, and RCA softened Elvis up a bit. And Elvis went into the Army in 1958. He was drafted. So for a lot of people, that pre-1958 Elvis is the real Elvis. The Elvis of the 60s is a bit different. Now here are the Beatles in New York, 1964, the British Invasion, Rolling Stones and those guys, and they covered a lot of American blues songs. So when they came to our country, they wanted to meet Elvis, and they met him in 1965. No photographers were allowed in the house, but here you can see a photograph that shows George, John, and Elvis. Paul's around there, Ringo, but they had a good time together, played some music, and that was cool. So when you go to Memphis, stop by Sun Recording Studio and reflect on Elvis Presley quitting his Day's work as a truck driver coming in and making his first record.